Greetings, fellow songwriters and seekers, and welcome back to Muse and Measure. If you haven't done so yet, please hit the subscribe button down below. All right, so breaking down melody into its little minutia, its particulars. So the basic unit of melody, obviously, is the note. A note is just a single pitch, and melodies are made up of pitch and rhythm. So what is pitch? Pitch is a sung note. La, that's a pitch, okay? La, 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 those are all pitches, okay? So rhythm is how you arrange them in time. La, 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 la. So I've taken those pitches and all of a sudden I have a different rhythm to them, okay? So that's the most basic unit of melody. But then the arrangement of these notes and rhythms into certain patterns and into individual ideas we call motifs. And motif is just basically a small, short musical idea. And it can be very, very short, like da-da-da-da, that one from Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. Or it can be something long, like do-dee-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo. Okay? So like Somewhere Over the Rainbow can be even longer than that. But it's basically one little idea. Okay? And so these motifs are very simple to come up with because they can be very, 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 very short. So take, for example, Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, the da-da-da-da. So what you can do with these motifs then is you can either repeat them, vary them, or move on to a completely new idea. And so when you work on these small little blocks of motif units, all of a sudden coming up with melodies is less of a daunting task. You can come up with these different motifs, and as long as you are doing the variation and the moving on to new ideas in a very tasteful way, you're going to come up with something that's pretty satisfying. So there are kind of three approaches for dealing with motifs. There is direct repetition. So if I was Beethoven and I was dealing with the Beethoven's Fifth Symphony and I came up with this, okay, which a lot of scholars believe is death knocking at his door. This is right after he wrote his Heiligenstadt Testament, or his letter to his brother, where he's basically talking about thinking about committing suicide because the one gift that he's been given by God, the gift of music, seems to be being robbed from him. It's by the loss of his hearing, and he sees no hope. So, duck, 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 duck. Okay. I don't know if that's true or not, but it's a nice story. So if I have this, so I can do what's called direct repetition. So I just play it twice. Or I can do repetition with variation, which means I might keep the intervals. So this is a minor third. The distance between those two is a minor third. So I might keep that and then move it to someplace else. Okay. Also, I repeated the rhythm. So the only thing I'm changing is the notes that I'm playing. The interval is staying the same, and the rhythm staying the same, and I'm doing some kind of variation on that motif. It's still basically the same idea, but it's been moved. Okay, so we call this transposition when you move it into a different notes. Basically, the intervals stay the same, but the notes are different. So. Okay. And Beethoven, if you listen to this whole first movement, he uses this motif over and over again, and kind of basically he keeps the rhythm and the idea, and the interval stays the same, but he moves it all over the key. Okay, so sometimes he will even change the interval, but the rhythm, that da-da-da-da, is constant. And you hear it all throughout, and it's used in a very brilliant way, being kind of thrown around the orchestra. He uses all the different instruments to keep it really keep it interesting, as opposed to just one person playing and just keeping the same repetition over and over again. He's using repetition and variation in tandem. They're working together. So he's repeating the same rhythm, oftentimes the same interval, but he's changing the instruments, and then he's changing the notes, even though the interval stays the same. So that's repetition with variation. And then the other thing you do with motifs is you just come up with a new one. Maybe you are just tired of the same rhythm, tired of the same intervals. You come up with something new. So come up with a brand new motif. Of course, I'm not Beethoven, so I didn't come up with something as brilliant as he did. But you come up with something brand new. And then you decide, okay, what's next? Do I want to do a variation on this new motif? Do I want this to have its own little world, to have its time, where it kind of can try out all of its formal qualities and all of its little manifestations in different intervals? Or do I want to just have it be solely for the purpose of variation? You know? So this is the balancing act, and this is the real art of melodic writing. Coming up with motifs is pretty simple. Anyone could come up with da-da-da-da. You know, a child could come up with that on the piano. But the real masterful stroke and the skill that goes into melodic writing comes when you know how to use repetition with variation, and then complete variation in order to create something that's really satisfying and stays interesting. So it's that, once again, it's that balance between the familiar with the surprise. And what's cool about repetition with variation is it incorporates both. You have the familiar, the da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da, but it's changing. So you have all these really cool variations on it, all with the same rhythm, all with the same kind of idea, but it's the familiar with this variation, and it really illuminates the music. So what I suggest you do is just come up with some motifs as an exercise. Now, you don't have to treat this as like a formal songwriting practice, because it's kind of counterintuitive when you first do it. So it's just kind of fun to come up with a series of motifs and just try to come up with a melody that uses maybe 1, 2, or 3 motifs. And try direct repetition, where you repeat it over and over again. So, you know, like we have Frère Jacques. The writer of Frère Jacques decided to repeat that motif again, so it goes twice. Now, if he'd done it again, it might have gotten a little bit boring or annoying. So he decided to come up with a new motif. And then he repeats that again. Okay? So far you have motif 1, repeat, motif 2, motif 2 again, and then he comes up with a third motif. Guess what? He repeats that again. And then a fourth motif, and repeats it again. Okay? So that one is just an exercise in direct repetition. There's no real variation of any of the motifs. And so that's a cool exercise to just try to write your own Frère Jacques, where you just do direct repetition and play around with direct repetition. And then do another exercise where you take one motif and see all the different ways you can use it. So let's see. Okay, so it might be a rhythmic motif, a da-da-da. Or you might keep the intervals, right? So if I'm going down, and then I'm going to go down a third again. Okay, so you can do all these different variations on motifs and just try out different things. And then also play around with variation. How much variation can you get away with before it all of a sudden becomes alienating? And not satisfying for the listener. Okay. Well, try these exercises out. Play around with motifs. Once again, this doesn't have to be your songwriting practice. This could be just something you do for a couple of minutes, just to try out and to start to understand how these little motifs come up. Because this will enhance your songwriting once you get these skills and you start thinking motifically and coming up with ideas that way. All right, well, best of luck with your songwriting practice, and I'll see you next time on Muse and Measure.